Thank you all for tuning in. Welcome to Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. We're doing an impromptu show today because my good friend, State Representative Chris Rabb, has his election tomorrow in Pennsylvania, District 3, the bluest district in the country. We need to get him across the finish line. So I wanted to get him on here to talk about these final 24 hours and make sure anyone in Pennsylvania 3 who's watching or anyone who knows anyone in Pennsylvania 3 goes out and votes for Chris Rabb for Congress. Representative Rabb, thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be back.
You have run a phenomenal campaign throughout. We connected late last year, and over the last 6 months, I've just seen your campaign pick up more and more momentum. These last few weeks, you've had some major endorsements come through. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I have the benefit of the endorsements from Justice Dems, Working Families Party, Democratic Socialists of America, um, uh, uh, Congressional Progressive Caucus, Common Defense, which I know you
Yes.
know a little bit something about that, Muslims United. Um, I have the extraordinary privilege of the public affirmation of folks I seek to work shoulder to shoulder with, including my favorite bonus rep, Summer Lee, and here in Pennsylvania, first Black woman to be elected to Congress from the state, representing Pittsburgh area. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Presley, Jamie Raskin, Latifah Simon, Delia Ramirez, Greg Kassar,
Yeah. The list
Maxwell
goes on and on. The
yeah,
list
so,
goes
I
on and
mean,
on.
I'm not used to that. I'm used to beating people with more endorsements than me because it's
Yeah.
the political class in my own city that has come at me. I've
Yeah.
never been endorsed by my own party in all the times I've run in contested races, and that's a badge of honor because 'cause I'm not running for Democrats, I'm running for the people. I'm
Yeah.
running principle over party.
I love that, and frankly, the Democratic Party has a 26% approval rating for a reason. People are sick and tired of the status quo, Joe. They want people who are not coming in to reform the system. They want people to build a new system, a better system that's committed to justice. We were talking offline about the Voting Rights Act and how two things can be true at once, and the second thing isn't really talked about as much. The first thing that's true is that these right wing Republicans are enacting Jim Crow legislation and trying to take us back to the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And the second thing that's true that's not talked about enough is that we can't just point the finger and say, hey, that's racist. We got to actually do something about it. And you're talking about the work that we need to do as progressives, as economic populists, as Democrats. What does that look like to you?
Well, one is we have to stand up, and that's really the hallmark of my campaign. Is like we keep showing up for each other and acknowledging that we have our fates are intertwined and that we have to move towards collective liberation, right? Our struggles are deeply connected. And so we have to stand up for our brothers and sisters in the South who are
Hmm.
most negatively impacted by the decimation of the Voting Rights Act, by the
Yeah.
race Supreme Court ruling, and the Supreme Court itself, the majority of Supreme Court, that is essentially enshrining um, i- i- um, white supremacy,
Yeah.
right? Um, but we also have to realize for those of us who do not live in the South that we are impacted by those rulings indirectly. And we also have to realize that there's a hand that a thumb pushed on the scale in one party towns where it's not about the ideology of inclusion and care and justice, but it's the ideology of incumbency. And I'm not connected to any party, any organization
Hmm.
that that is centers incumbency over justice. And if you are part of, if you are in a district, you are in a community or a city where it's about entrenched power, then they don't have your best interests at heart
That's right.
because we need to diffuse power. That's what organizing is about. We have to see ourselves in the change we want to see. We are not waiting for a savior to come uh, pull us out of our misery. We save ourselves. That is our tradition. And as someone, as you know, who is deeply rooted and follows the spirit of my ancestors and as a family historian and genealogist, I've traced the footprints of my ancestors for generations and centuries in this country who are all on the right side of history, who are abolitionists, who are civil rights activists and freedom fighters. And they created a way when everyone else, you said you couldn't do it, you can't do it. We just said, step aside and watch us. And that's what we're doing in this moment. And so, in a city like Philadelphia, it's the bluest congressional district in the entire country. It's the
Wild.
first time in 35 years that there's no incumbent on the ballot, so it's a level playing field. But the establishment and the political class have chosen another opponent, and they think those endorsements, are gonna be enough, and it's not. It's gonna be people power. I have hundreds of volunteers from all backgrounds, faiths, generations who are putting in the work, and organized people beat organized money every time.
Every single time. And the reality is that the other primary opponents that you face, there's a chasm of difference between the two of y'all. And one I want to focus on is the basic element of fundamental human rights when we talk about things like calling out the genocide in Gaza. To me, that's become a litmus test. I don't call it a purity test because I think we're talking about a fundamental basis of humanity. That's not a purity test. That's a basic litmus test that do you care about human rights and human dignity at all. Can you talk a little bit about that contrast between you and your opponents?
Well, I mean, it's shameful that I'm the only Democrat, I'm the only candidate in the Democratic primary who will use the term genocide and acknowledge our complicity in genocide with our tax dollars and, through our US government and the imperialism and militarism that we lift up. It is unacceptable. And the fact that that is the controversy, that I say genocide and not that they don't, tells you so much about, how these narratives are constructed against those of us who are on the right side of history.
Hmm.
This should be the norm. I shouldn't need moral courage to acknowledge a basic and awful and cruel truth that they're decimating a people with our tax dollars.
Hmm.
And we consent in that if we do not speak up. And so to that to that degree, it has become an issue. Um, but we also have to realize that our fates are intertwined because we're spending billions of dollars now in
That's right.
Iran
That's right.
when that could be paying for universal health care and free childcare and debt-free college education and social housing and a federal jobs guarantee.
Guarantee. Yeah.
All of these
Yeah.
things are all within our scope, and the reason I know it is in the very moderate Biden administration, they cut child poverty in half by extending the child
That's right.
tax credit that put money in people's pockets when they needed it the most, and if we could half child poverty in 1 year under a moderate Democrat, imagine what else we can do, and we
Right.
see what Mayor Mondani's doing
That's right.
in a matter of
Yeah.
weeks,
Yeah.
and that's all based on a progressive, substantive, comprehensive, thoughtful, set of policies that help everyone, and that's what I'm seeking to do in Congress.
And I think I'm so glad you made that connection, Rep, because I think folks forget that this is not just about, and I don't want to say just as a diminutive, but this is not exclusively about having the moral courage to condemn genocide. It's also the recognition that by being silent on that, you are also condemning our communities here at home in more ways than one. The fact that we spent what $70 billion on this illegal war on Iran, which is enough to pay for a year of free public college, the fact that this administration is trying to push through a $1.5 trillion military budget, which would pay for 20 years of free public college. I mean, it's asinine that we are still having these debates. We have money for bombing an Iranian schoolgirl, with
That's right.
165 kids murdered. We don't have money to ensure that the children here at home are fed. And I think anytime someone's running for public office and wants more power and not willing to call out that basic aspect of humanity, it tells me that that's not somebody I want to trust at
That's right.
all. When we talk about your campaign, I've seen you focus heavily on this aspect of economic justice, of making sure working families have basic human dignity. What are some of the policies that you want to push through in Congress once you're elected to turn that philosophy into a reality?
Well, first, we have to have universal health care. We need Medicare for all.
Yeah.
And I've been attacked on the campaign trail for being too bold, Qasim, for being
Yes.
too bold. That is the last critique we need to have on people who seek to
It's
be
wild. Yeah.
public servants on the federal level. We need to be as bold as humanly possible because only in our boldness and substance can we begin to change systemically, which is the issue. I'm tired of us playing around the edges and people expecting gold stars for that when the most vulnerable have not been significantly benefited by
Yeah.
these incremental changes. And so Medicare for all. With the current iteration of the bill in the House, and this is Congresswoman Jayapal, who also endorsed me,
Yep.
uh, it's been strengthened such that by year 2, we will have it. But starting on day 1 upon enactment, everyone 55 and older and everyone 19 and younger gets access to healthcare. Not healthcare insurance, health,
Healthcare.
right? And that's extraordinary, because that's something we should have had for generations as the richest country in world history. So that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Also, a living wage for all. Apparently, I've introduced the boldest living wage for all bill in the country without knowing it, but my bill expanded it on the state level to include incarcerated workers
Mm.
who are thousands of largely poor black men who get paid 19 cents an hour.
Yeah. I don't
19
think
cents.
people realize that. I don't think people realize that if you are incarcerated, because the 13th Amendment never actually abolished slavery,
Right.
you are allowed legally to pay incarcerated people as if they were enslaved at 19 cents an hour.
That's right, and they don't get 19 cents an hour. That's how much they earn. They don't keep 19 cents because you take 25% right off the top, then you
Taxes.
have restitution, you have nothing left. So for those conservatives who may be accidentally stumbling onto this, and you care about victims' rights because that's something, I think everyone cares about victims' rights, but clearly not as much as conservatives, as they like to say. If you care about them, and 80% of folks in state prisons have to pay restitution to their victims, how are the victims ever gonna get paid if
That's
they're
right.
getting paid 19 cents an hour? So if you care about justice, you care about second chances, you care about victims, pay them for the labor that they produce and also allow them to reintegrate because most of them are coming back to our communities and they need to be properly skilled and have networks and all the resources so that they can do what they do. And, this is personal to me because a lot of the folks who I wrote letters of support for on the inside who I've visited have come home and I've employed them and at a living wage. So this is not like rhetorical flourish or intellectual talk. This is real. I know people.
Yep.
One of my friends who lives down the street, he was on death row for 25 and a half years for a crime he didn't commit, and he's been exonerated. And our own city of Philadelphia will not is appealing the settlement, this major multi-million-dollar settlement. The city of Philadelphia, which is run by Democrats, doesn't want to pay this brother who was put in a cage for a crime he didn't commit and was actually they issued a death warrant twice,
Mm.
and he was able to
Indefensible.
survive and do all those things. So all these things are related.
Yeah, and it's indefensible that we're still having these discussions when the conversation should be around how do we ensure meaningful restorative justice? How do we ensure that people can reintegrate into society and be economically viable and not have any incentive to return to a life that led them down that path in the first place? The current model is designed, we have one of the highest recidivism rates in the developed world, and European nations who work on the models you're talking about have less than a half the recidivism rate that we do, which means lower crime, which means lower costs, which means safer communities. It's a win-win for all, and I think until we have the moral courage of people in Congress to do that, we're not going to get there. What do you say to folks who look at the the realities that are developing right now? For example, 3 million Virginians vote to redistrict, and the Virginia Supreme Court says, we don't care," and the U.S. Supreme Court says, "It doesn't matter to us." The fact that the Voting Rights Act was passed unanimously, and the Supreme Court said, "Yeah, we don't care." The fact that Roe v. Wade had 50 years of precedent, Supreme Court said, "Yeah, we don't care." What do you say to the folks who say voting doesn't matter? It doesn't matter if I vote, so I'm just going to stay home.
Well, if you don't like any of the things that you just mentioned, um, it's politicians who put those Supreme Court justices on the bench, right? They had
Yeah.
to go through the Senate, confirms, right? So what that means is bad politicians are elected by good people who stay at home.
Mm,
And think
mm,
about it with Trump. Trump has never won a majority ever.
ever,
He's
ever.
won a plurality, but he's never won a majority, which means the vast majority of Americans have never supported him. And
Yeah.
yet he has extraordinary power because we've ceded that power because we do not understand the power of the vote. And it's not a love letter. You don't have to love 100% of my platform or my background or my personality. But who do you want to hold to account and believe that your ability to hold any elected to account will be possible? Me, someone who's supported by over 7,000 small donors, or someone who is only getting funding from rich insiders and corporate execs. Like,
Yeah,
that should
no
tell
brainer.
you how you are going to govern by how you campaign. So you don't have to agree with everything about me, but if you believe that it's more likely that I'm gonna be held to account based on how I've run and my past experiences, then you need to make that decision, because if you don't, the decision will be made for you. And that's how we've wound up in all these situations, because good people don't vote. And that's how we get bad politicians instead of transformative public servants who are committed to the people, the many, not the moneyed.
There's I completely agree, and I think there's it needs to be said over and over again. People died for the right to vote. People bled for the right to vote. John Lewis is the one who comes to mind, but there's so many more that we can talk about. And while it alone to me isn't the solution, because we need to activate, we need to organize, we need to build coalitions, all things you've been doing, it is a necessary component for us to move forward. And as angry as people are, all that anger is justified. Every bit of it is justified.
Yep.
And still, the answer remains we need to continue to organize and vote and bring more people out, because the alternative is fascism. It's far worse. There's no coming back from that. One of the other criticisms we see of the Democratic Party is, the fecklessness in leadership. What's your vision on the future of the leadership of the Democratic Party, and how do we get it to be an actual opposition party as opposed to an appeasement party who writes strongly worded letters?
Yes. So great point. So there's two things that are relevant here. And one directly relates to you and what you've done with your platform is we need to end the era of media consolidation. We
Yeah.
need media democracy and justice. What does that mean? We need a diverse array of voices that are connected to our own, where we own our own labor, where we control those outlets. And it's not just five tech bros deciding what we consume, right? Because they have the biggest influence over the narratives that we hear, and equally important, don't hear, right? So if you just watch corporate, news and such, you would think that you're more likely to be bitten by a shark than be hurt by asthma caused by climate change, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
they control those narratives. The other is electoral reform, voting rights, and campaign finance reform. As long as we have the corrosive influence of money in politics, not much is going to change. So I have folks who say, "Where do you stand on term limits?" Yes, I support term limits, but that's not going to change things if we still have the corrosive influence of money in politics. And since Citizens United, it has been controlled so much, influenced so much by the billionaire slash Epstein class. So we have to address that. And here's the reason I have hope, because no one likes to be in a box. Like, I've had to be on call time where I'm dialing for dollars just for hours and
Yeah.
hours instead of engaging people and doing the work, and having to call people who are used to giving. And one of the reasons Zoran Mondani was so successful is because in New York they have public financing. So
That's
for
right.
every dollar that he raised up to $250, he got 12 times back from taxpayers. And so he was able to raise a bunch of money by having a grassroots campaign and not spend all the time trying to reach out to rich people asking for money.
Hmm.
And when we do that, we're going to see the people who are already in Congress and who will be in Congress, who will be less tethered to corporate interests and the elites, because they don't have to be supported by them to win and stay elected.
That's
And
right.
that's going to be a more reflective of the will of the people. And that's something that we can definitely have an influence on, because there are people who may not share my politics, or at least not right now, who would change their tune if they could have public financing and didn't have to get money from the usual suspects who do not have our interests at heart.
That's exactly right. And at the end of the day, money unfortunately buys politicians, and that's why to those watching, electing someone like Christopher Rabb is so important, because he's funded by people. He's not funded by corporations. He's not funded by APAC. He's not funded by dark money packs. He's funded by individuals, by human beings who actually can vote. And to me, that is a purity test. I will not get behind someone who is funded by corporations. I just can't do it. I mean, there has to be a line we draw when we say that Citizens United is corrupting our country, and we can't just talk about people funded campaigns. We have to put our money behind them as well. And every person on here that I've interviewed, I've donated to myself. But now we're down to the last 24 hours before election day. In fact, election day is tomorrow on Tuesday, May 19th. What can folks do now to help you get across the finish line and make sure that we close the night with a W?
Well, just tell everyone you know in Philly. You can check me out at Chris Rabb on Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook. That's RABB. Go to my website, chrisrabb.com. I want you to feel like you are part of the real donor class, the folks who are connected, who are closest to the pain, who understand that this is a collective victory that doesn't benefit just me or Philly or this congressional district, but society as a whole. I'd love for you all to be in the first few thousand of folks who supported my campaign, and that I can earn the right to call myself your bonus rep wherever you may be in the nation.
And for those folks who are in Philly but aren't sure if they're in District 3, can you describe District 3 or where they can find out if they're in your district or not?
Absolutely. Well, you can go to chrisrabb.com. We have a map, but it's pretty much the left side of the city plus South Philly.
So
It,
the west side,
the west of Broad Street. If you've
okay,
ever voted for Congressman Dwight Evans, who's retiring, that means you're in the district.
gotcha. I'm thinking the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air song, West Philadelphia, born and raised.
That's right.
That had to
That
be a
that's in
theme.
the district.
Uh, Rep, thank you so much. You run a brilliant campaign for the people on justice, on human rights. I wish we could duplicate you and have 535 members of Congress, but we will absolutely start with you to get you elected. For those watching, check them out at chrisrab.com. And Rep Rab, we hope to have you back on after you win this primary election.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, brother. You're watching Let's Address This with Qasim Rashid. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and tune in for our next conversation pretty soon. Peace out, guys.